Hi, everybody. Welcome to Edu-Malanga, where we make maths education videos for the South African Matric syllable. So, essentially, sentiments. Okay. So, right, we're ready. Let's go. Today, I'll be giving you guys an introduction to what finance, growth, and decay is. So according to the syllabus, this should be revision for grade 11 if you're a South African student, but nonetheless, we will explain and yes, just remind ourselves the different kinds of interests and forms of growth or decay that happens to money. So essentially, that all forms part of the finance module or finance unit. But underneath that, we know that there's growth where your money can grow, like, say, for an example, an investment. And then we also understand that there is potential for decay, like you buy a car now, in 3 years' time, it is not worth the same price you bought that car. So, touche, Mr. BMW, touche. Okay, cool. So, if we're looking at interest, so interest is essentially the rate of what our reserve bank sets. So our central bank sets a certain amount and it says to our lenders, which are the banks or whoever your lender is, it could even be a loan shark, it sets a sort of precedented amount where they can add their percent after that. So if the repo rate is like, say, 6%, then the bank itself will add a small percent, and then what we get is the interest rate. And it will also depend on your spending habits, your ability to pay back money, where they decide an interest rate. So in our syllabus, we're going to get questions where they give us the interest rate, or they'll say determine the interest rate. So we don't need to understand the intricacies of how the Reserve Bank or the bank determines it, but they'll give it to us, or they'll say this is the interest rate. Okay, cool. So it's very important, especially once you guys finish school and all of that, and you guys are getting into this world of finance. It's very important to look at interest rates and not just take things because the bank is agreeing. Okay, it's a lot of random information. So there are two forms of interest for growth. So if I speak of growth, I'm looking at something, for example, an investment. So I have put my money in, let's say, Old Mutual, and I want it to grow. I want to not have the same amount of money in a few years' time. And so what Old Mutual will offer me is interest, because they are able to use my money to make more money, or use my money to invest money themselves, or use my money to borrow people, and people will pay back at a higher little price. And so they can offer me interest, right? As opposed to putting the money in under your bed. So there's two forms of interest. We have simple interest and we have compound interest. This is what we've learned before, so this is just revision. What simple interest is interest that is based on the initial amount, and compound interest is based on the new amount. So let's say I put in a specific amount now. The interest, if it's simple, will be based on what I put in. But if it's compound, it'll be what I put in now and then multiplied by that interest rate. And then the next year, it's what it was last year, multiplied by the new interest rate. And the following year, it was what it was the year before. And so it grows a little bit faster with compound interest, if you get what I'm saying. So the formula for simple interest, therefore, becomes A being the amount you're going to have in the end, okay? The present amount you have, 1 plus I, and then I is multiplied by n, right? Remember I said it's just based on the initial amount. Okay, and then what we get for compound interest is same A is equal to 1 plus I, but now every year it's changing, therefore it's to the power of I. Okay, similarly, when we look at the depreciation, the simple depreciation, or what we call straight line method, is where we're just looking at initially this was the price and we're taking this percent away. But when we look at a diminishing method or a reducing balance, we first have to calculate that last year it reduced, it became a new amount, and then on that amount we subtract, not on the first amount. Okay, so but luckily we've got a formula for that. Okay, So there are two forms of decay. Okay, simple decay, again, like I just explained, called the straight line method. And compound decay, called the diminishing balance method. So what that gives me is that the formula for the simple or straight line decay is, again, the amount I have in the end, or at that time that we're looking for, the amount I started with, again, the interest formula, but now because it is decay, it's subtracted, we're subtracting the interest away. This is the straight line. Then for the reducing balance, same thing. A is the amount we have in the end. P is the amount we started with. 1 minus I to the power of n. And that is, dear friends and friends, the compound decay method. Okay, so what will happen if, in some cases, depending on who you're working with, you get an interest rate that is not necessarily looked at or reviewed every year. So it's reviewed every quarter, every month, sometimes even every day. It's compounded daily. So what we get, if that's the case, okay, if the annual interest rate that is quoted in the question that we're given, or in your bank statements, or in your student loans, for those who are going to need to get student loans, go rough on this earth, guys. Graph, graph, graph. Sometimes I wish, and no one's richer than the rest, but that is not life. Okay, so what we get is that the quoted interest rate, so whatever they have quoted for you, did more frequently than once a year. The effective, so the interest rate that is felt, will be higher. Okay, because I am I am adding interest on interest on interest on interest more times than doing it once. So even if it's a small difference, it'll be higher because I am redoing it on a bigger amount every time, or I'm redoing it on a smaller amount every time if it is a diminishing balance method. Will be higher than the nominal, which is the quoted one over here, interest rates, and is determined by the following formula. So this formula, we're gonna like recall it later. There are some instances where it's become so important to look at that because, especially in the examples that I'm going to have in the videos to come, we're going to be seeing situations where there's two things happening and you cannot look at the interest on one way. The interest is quoted differently. So let's say there's an investment involved, but there's a loan involved that has a specific type of calculation of interest, but then the person is paying back a specific rate, and so then you're going to need to use this formula. Okay, So we're going to hold on to this formula and remember it, okay? The effective interest. 1 plus the effective interest is equal to 1 over, and then I, depending on how they calculated it, and then M over M. M being, say, for instance, if it was quarterly, to be 4. If it was yearly, 12, or you get what I'm saying? So 365 is daily, depending how they are recalculating or compounding the interest. Okay, so therefore, okay, so now we know what interest is, and interest is the number that you are putting in your formula to determine the amount accumulated after an investment. So investment's been with Sandam, okay, has been growing with compound interest that is compounded more than once a year. Then we call it K. K times a year. This is going to be very useful. A year. What we do is we divide the quoted interest, nominal interest, whatever you're given, by K. Okay, so in the formula, we're going to divide interest by K and multiply the term, or the number of years, by K. So essentially, we're changing the time period. Okay, so remember in this formula here, interest rate of, let's say, X. I'll take X and I'll divide X by, let's say, 12 if it's every month. And then I'll take whatever N is, 5 years, whatever, and I will say N times 5. So our interest rate I divide, and N I multiply by K. Okay, more than one transaction. Okay, so we're not just doing one thing, right? We're doing one thing is growing, and then at some point they start paying. Draw a timeline. Okay, so you just draw a line and then say year 1, year 2, etc., etc. Timeline, so that you can visualize what happened over time. We're going to see in the coming videos how important that becomes, so that we can't mix up that when stuff happened. Okay, and then when we do this, we must remember to take all values at one moment in time before adding or subtracting back. When taking values back in time, you are finding the P value. So if, let's say, they tell you that now 5 years later I have 300,000, I started off with 100,000. I started and I've been working at an interest rate of X. You need to get back to say, hey, all they invested in was 200 and it grew to 3,000. Okay, so when taking back in time, when taking values back in time, you are finding P, not A. Okay, that is what I'm saying. That's it. Okay, you're finding the P value for a known A value. A known A value. Okay, in the formula. So then remember the formula where we were, so what you're going to do to get the other side is instead of putting a positive in, you'll put a negative in. Um, thank you for tuning in. Please do watch the next video where I'll be going through the first example on finance decay and growth. Finance growth decay. Have a great day, great afternoon. Remember to subscribe, share with your friends, and like our stuff. Please comment down below, engage with us. Thank you. I love you a lot.